Everybody, welcome back to the next part in my dialing in series for our Line 6 Helix. Today I'm taking a look at our duct delay that we have in our Line 6 Helix. This is supposedly a model of the famous TC Electronic 2290 delay. From what I can tell, it doesn't have all the features of the original 2290. If I'm not mistaken, the original 2290 had some modulation abilities with the delays and whatnot. This is more focusing on the ducking portion of the 2290 along with a couple other features, if I'm not mistaken on that. And a lot of folks might be asking, what is this ducking, right? I've heard a lot of people ask, what is a duct delay? And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to take a look at how we can hopefully dial it in, at least so that you understand what the parameters are doing, so that you can be more successful in dialing it into your needs. It's a very powerful delay with a lot of possibilities with the parameters that we're given. So let's dive over to HX Edit and take a look at what we have. So on this preset here, I just threw in a very fast little preset using the German Mahadiva amp. For no other reason than I haven't used it in a while and I really like it. My typical template, but what I did is I took the transistor tape out and I threw the duct delay in. So let's go through the parameters first of all. Again, I'm going to use the stereo version for this. The only difference between stereo and mono, again, is that we don't have a scale feature on the mono. So it's just going to be, all the delays are going to be up the middle, but the stereo version can also just have everything up the middle if the scale is set to 100%, but we can stereoize it by kind of bouncing the repeats between the speakers or ears of the headphones, or however you want to look at it in the stereo spectrum, right? So I'll focus on the stereo version. We'll go through the parameters one at a time here, but anybody who hasn't watched my dialing in with the transistor tape or my original delay videos, probably a good idea to go watch those, because I explain these sort of standard delay parameters in great detail. I'll run over them really quickly here, but if you're confused on any of those and I don't explain them well enough here, please go watch the other videos. So what we start with is the note sync, or if I hit the little clock icon here, the time. So if we set it to time, we're going to have our delay in milliseconds, okay? How long before the repeats start, essentially, right? And if we switch it over to note sync, we have it locked to the tempo up here in the corner. I like to use it with note sync. Pretty much, there are times I haven't, but pretty much always I use it with note sync so I can lock it in with the tempo of whatever song I'm using it with. If I'm playing live and there's varying tempo, I'll sit with my tap tempo button at, to get it on, and then if it drifts off of that, then I'll go back and tap tempo it again. So I like to use note sync. Feedback is simply going to be how many repeats we get, just like all the other delays, right? If we have that set down here to 0, we'll just get a single repeat, or roughly, and as we set it higher, we're going to get more and more repeats out of it. The low cut and high cut's kind of interesting. This is going to simply give us the ability to EQ, in a sense, just the delayed part of our signal, just the echoes, right? So if we want a lower Phi sound, we can maybe pull the high cut back so that the repeats we have are more low Phi. You can hear how they get all the high end cut out. Very muddy, right? Whereas if I go up much higher, we have all that high end back in there. Now the thing about that is it doesn't affect the unaffected signal. My tone stays the same, right? And same thing with the low cut, so we can move that way up and just really kind of sculpt the sound of our repeats, okay? So that's a nice feature on here if you want to give it more of maybe like a lo-fi muffled sound to it, right? The mix is pretty self-explanatory. That's going to be the mix between the unaffected signal and the affected signal, right? At 50%, usually we have about the same volume level with most delays. You'll notice it's a little different here because of the ducking feature, but that's going to set it about equal for our unaffected signal and our affected signal. The level is just the level output, just like all the other delays of what's going to be fed out of this into whatever is after it. The scale, like I've showed you before, with it at 100%, it's mono. You know, we're straight up the middle. If I pull that back to 50%, you're going to hear how now the delay bounces between speakers. Okay. You can set it to different places to get more of a stereo effect. For this, I'm just going to leave it at 100%. I'm not really interested in the stereo effect of this, but rather these next parameters we're going to talk about. So if that was too quick an explanation, like I said, go back and watch some of my previous videos on delay, and it'll explain that more in depth, all right? So what is ducking? Well, first of all, we have to understand what ducking is. And ducking means, in audio, when we have one part of a signal, let's say, that while it's going on, it's going to attenuate or turn the volume down of another signal happening at the same time. A really common usage would be in voiceover tracks where maybe there's a music bed underneath, and maybe they want the music loud while the video is playing, let's say, and then as soon as the narrator starts to speak, they want the music to be lowered so that the attention is to the vocal. So they could trigger, you know, the volume of the music to be turned down when the voice starts to speak. And that would be ducking the audio, music audio, away from the voice audio, if that makes sense. So ducking means to basically turn down the volume on something to kind of make room for something else to stand out more. I hope that was a good explanation on that. So with the ducking delay, what we can do is we can have it so that while we're playing our notes and our main part of our song or riff or whatever, it's going to turn the delay down to whatever degree we want it to. And then when we finish playing, it's going to allow the delay to come back up. So you might say, what's the purpose of that? Well, the purpose is maybe we want a bit of a heavier delay when we stop playing, but we don't want it kind of mucking up our sound while we are playing. So we could duck it down while we are playing and then release it afterwards, if that makes sense. So that's what ducking is going to be. And this actually has different types of dynamics, ducking or gating, which is the reverse of it, and we'll talk about that in a moment. That would be having the big sound of the delay while we're playing, and then having it just totally stop, or stop to a certain degree after we stop playing. Okay, so let's talk about how we can do this. Well, we have these different controls. We have threshold, ducking, dynamic attack, dynamic release, and dynamic type. Okay. We're starting to get into sounding more like a compressor here, and if you've watched any of my videos on compression before, you will understand the attack and the release and the threshold. Let's talk about it in terms of the ducking delay. Well, the ducking control, first of all, is the amount it's going to turn that volume down while we're playing, right? So at one extreme, it wouldn't turn it down at all, and it would almost be like it's just turned off, right? So if I was to take this down to 0, let's see what happens. A huge amount of delay walking all over my tone. But if I turn the ducking up to 100%, now listen. The delay doesn't come in until after I stop playing. There's 0 delay while I'm playing. The delay comes in after I'm done playing. Now that's an extreme setting, but if I set it back to here, it would allow a little bit of delay to come through while I'm playing. And then if you notice, the delay comes back in much stronger after I'm done. Does that make sense? So that's what the ducking control is going to do. It's going to allow me to turn the volume down however much I want while I'm playing, and then have it go back to its normal settings based off of the mix control and whatnot up here. Because the mix of 50% is a pretty heavy delay sound, right? As soon as we bring that ducking even in up to close to 50%, some people might say, well, why don't I just turn my mix down then? Well, it's because then that's not going to give you the bigger delay after I stop playing, right? So that's what that does. Now, you might say, well, what is the threshold? Well, the threshold is going to set the point at which the ducking is going to begin. okay? So do I want the ducking to begin at a very low volume or a very high volume? So again, if I turn my threshold down to 0 here, versus all the way up. And to hear it even more, let's go 100% ducked. Right? So the ducking's only going to let go once we pass a certain threshold. So again, right? You notice how it's very subdued. If I turn the threshold down now, see how the ducking lets go much sooner. Here, much later. And it almost doesn't ever let it totally let go, but set much lower, it allows it to let go right away, right? Because it gets back beyond that threshold at a different point, if that makes sense. I hope I'm explaining that right. So let's put that back up around 50%. Now, dynamic attack and release. Well, the dynamic attack is going to tell us, once the sound passes the threshold we've set, how quickly is it going to start ducking? Okay, so again now, if I was to set the dynamic attack way up here at 2 seconds, it's really not doing anything because the ducking never has a chance to duck the sound. I've never given it that opportunity, right? Because the delay is kind of too short and it never gets there. So if I turn this dynamic attack down to 10 milliseconds though, you hear I don't get any delay until I stop playing, because as soon as I pass that threshold, 10 milliseconds later, the ducking kicks in, okay? Over here, the ducking never gets a chance to kick in because I have it set at 2 seconds. So that threshold setting is kind of almost useless because it never has a chance to attack because we have the attack setting too high, if that makes any sense. So if I set that down lower here, you know, if I go at 10 milliseconds, it's not going to let much through at all. It's going to squash down on it right away until I stop playing. Now, if I come up and maybe change that to a little higher setting, probably a little too high still. Let's maybe go there. I'll bring the ducking down just a bit there. So you can kind of see that it tells us how long it's going to take once the signal passes the threshold for the ducking settings that we have to kick in. You see how these controls are very interactive. When we change one thing, it changes something else. So having an understanding of them is very important to successfully dialing this in. And the dynamic release is going to just do the exact opposite of that, okay? It's going to tell us that once the signal passes the threshold on the way back down, how quickly is it going to release the ducking? This is going to be important for having a natural transition between you know, sort of our playing and letting the delay come back in kind of naturally. So if I was to have it release very quickly, see how it just jumps back in? It's almost kind of shocking, but if I was to go over here to 5 seconds, it never even has a chance to let the ducking go because those delayed repeats are gone well in advance of 5 seconds, right? So if I came back here 1.8 seconds, same sort of thing, right? So Now we hear it kind of come back in. Okay, so is that a good explanation so far? So how do we set this in a way for what we want? Well, that really depends on what it is we want, right? Do we want something that bounces right back in right away, or is it something that we want to be more natural? I would tend to want something that is out of the way somewhat while I'm playing. See, the problem is if we put the ducking to 100% and then take all of the delayed signal away so it's bone dry while we're playing, chances are when we reintroduce it with our threshold and our release, it's going to have a bit of an unnatural bounce back in. So if we duck a little bit less to allow a little bit of delay through, and then let it sort of gradually maybe, I don't know if that's the right term, but just more subtly come back in, it might be a better thing to do. So let's do this. Let's set our ducking maybe around 50%, okay? Here's the sound without any ducking at all. You'll hear how powerful this delay echo is. Quite a few repeats, mixes at 50%. It's almost overpowering the direct sound. But if I bring the ducking into around 50%, we'll hear what happens. You get a subtle bit of delay underneath the direct tone, but it doesn't wonk all over it. It's going to allow it to, it's not going to wash it out in a mix and get lost, right? And then it comes back in at the end. So at the end of, maybe I'll just add a few more repeats here, just to accentuate it a bit. I'm going to actually bring the ducking down a little bit more. Okay, so we hear it kind of rush back in a little bit. I'm going to say now, well, I'm going to set, let's see what happens if we set the threshold way down on it. What happens if we go to the opposite extreme? Okay, so as we go to 0, what happens? The transition back into from where we have it ducked to not ducked is more abrupt, right? You hear it kind of swell up. If I go over here, it doesn't swell up at all because it never gets a chance to get past that threshold to be released. So let's bring that back at about 50% and see what happens. Okay, it's still pumping in a little bit. Let's go to 66. It's not too bad. Let's go back here. I am going to go back to maybe 50%. That's not bad. I'm going to leave that threshold there. You sort of hear how it just swells up a little bit. Not bad though. I'm going to take my release actually now, and I'm going to turn that up a little bit more. So that it takes a little bit longer to swell up back to where it's supposed to be and let that ducking go. That's a little more natural. I'm going to bring the ducking up to about 50% now. So that's swelling in a little bit. Bring that back just a hair. Bring that threshold back. See, that makes it swell up a little bit too much. Still, again, it's swelling up a little much there. So you see how it comes back in nicely? I'm going to bring the release up a little bit more. I'm going to bring my ducking up. So that works really nicely now. Now, if I was to take my ducking from 71% back down to here, here's what we have. This is with no ducking. I bring that back up. If you want a little bit more of that tail to come through, then we're going to bring our release down. Right? And our threshold too, I think, right, is going to allow that to come in more. And you know, let's do this. Let's go lower with our threshold. And I'm going to go higher with my release. Too much on that one. And I could also take that ducking all the way up and see what happens. So it really depends on what you want personally. You can kind of see how those parameters affect things and change it up in a way that it's very tweakable, right? If we want more of the delay, and this is all going to change in a mix too, right? Maybe you do want something more dramatic. You know, so there you have it, so that there's almost basically no delay going while I'm playing. As soon as I stomp, it comes in. That's with the low threshold, the release at that 766 milliseconds. If I take that release way down, it's going to change things up again. See how quickly that just jumps back in now. Right, that threshold's almost a little bit too low. You know, is that what you want? Then that's great. Now what happens with the gating? If I change that from ducking to gating, what happens now is it's going to let all of the delay go through while I'm playing and then chop it off in some way when I stop. Wow, that's a pretty cool effect. Now, it doesn't have to be that dramatic either. I have the ducking at 100%. If I take the ducking down here, now it does nothing. It just turns the delay off, right? Now the threshold, if I was to come up, gets weird, right? Because it's trying to find that place to shut that delay off. Kind of choking on it a little bit. There it's, if we wanted to just be like a brick wall shut off, right? So we'll leave that there for that effect. The release now is going to affect this dramatically. See, if I don't allow it to release for what I have here, almost a second, it's gonna take a second before it chops it off. It's gonna fade it out more then. That might be what you want, or if I went all the way up, we wouldn't even hear the effect anymore. It's just gonna keep trailing off like it normally would. If I want it chopped right off, I go right down, so 10 milliseconds after I stop playing, it chops it off like a brick wall. Right? And maybe we want something in between. Right? Less abrupt, more abrupt. And it just chops it off. That could be a very useful, and it's gating. It's exactly what it does. It just shuts the gate on it, right? So it gives us that ability to be able to kind of chop it down after, have lots of delay while we're playing and nothing after. And it doesn't even have to be lots. I could then take my mix control and bring it back to a normal area. Even this here. But just so that I can't have any delays after I stop playing. So basically you'll have, on sustained notes, you will have a little bit of echo, and then as soon as you stop and drop below that threshold we've set, boom, it chops it off, gates it shut, okay? Does that make any sense? And I hope you guys kind of understand the parameters a bit. With these dialing in videos for effects, I can't really say, here's the best setting, because it's going to depend on what you like. It's more about learning what the parameters do so that then we can more efficiently and quickly dial it into what we need for a particular situation. As you can see, this could be used for a number of different things between the ducking and the gating. Basically with the gating, everything is kind of reversed, flipped around backwards, right? So if that's what we need, then we would use that setting. If it's, what we need is something else, then we would use it in a different manner. So it does give us that ability to do things that we wouldn't normally be able to do with other delays, which is kind of nice, without at least adding other things into them. I guess you could add a gate, you know, on a separate path with a delay to get that, but with it all being built in here, it is kind of nice. I hope you guys enjoy that, and I hope that was helpful, and I hope I explained things right. I really do. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Share the video with anybody you think would get some use out of it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit the little bell notification so you get notified when I put new videos out. I will be back very soon with some more content. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in, and I will see you very soon. Ciao for now.